And I think, trying to keep that concept in your head might be overwhelming. Seeing it on the board visually and being able to literally see the path for that deterrence theory almost overwhelmingly takes, it's just good for educational, as an educational tool, I think. Okay, game solutions, right? How do we solve these games, right? There are literally, depending on how big the game is, many different ways, and for some games, infinite ways of solving the game, right? As information is incorporated into the game, and I'll talk about information in a second, but as more information is incorporated into the game, the strategies change, right? So the less information we have, the more difficult it is actually to play the game. And I talked yesterday in the video about the relationship between the efficiency of the game and the amount of information we have. The more information we have, the more efficient we can be in playing the game. The more of our information that we can keep outside of away from our enemies, and we can secure for ourselves, the better and the more effective we are at playing the game. So the game really, at its most foundational, in one aspect of it, in its most foundational sense, has to do with the acquisition and the containment of information. We want to get as much information as we can and not disclose that information, because it's that information that we use to optimize our strategic planning in the game, right? I know something you don't know, and I have more information than you, therefore I can use that information to my advantage to beat you out of outcomes that you want, to maximize my own outcomes. So games are solved by reaching equilibrium, right? The game is solved by reaching equilibrium. And as I said, I'm not going to get into the mathematics behind equilibriums. I'm not. It's just, again, it would complicate the discussion more than anything. Most people, unless you're already steeped in the tradition, have no experience, no exposure, have never had exposure to game theory, much less game theory in its application to conflict analysis and international warfare. I mean, that's very, very specific. So as an introduction, it's best to just recognize that an equilibrium state solves or ends the game. I'll give you a sort of very general idea of what that state looks like. First thing, in talking about an equilibrium state, the equilibrium as a solution to the game is not to be understood as the best of all possible situations, right? Equilibrium is not the best of all possible situations, right? This is sort of Leibnizian, if you will, right? So it's not the best of all, emphasis on all, possible. And I'll give you an example in a second to clarify, right? So just for the time being, just sort of reserve that in the back of your head, right? We're not talking about the best of all possible. What we are talking about, right? So it's not this, it is this. What we're talking about is the best possible. Right? The best of all possible and the best possible are two different conceptions. So the example that I give in B1 is, for example, look at temptation in this game here, T. Look at temptation as the best possible outcome, but reward as the best of all possible outcomes. We will say that we have reached a state of equilibrium where we attain the best possible outcome, which is not to say that the best of all possibles doesn't bring about an equilibrium. We can have an equilibrium if we attain the reward, where both parties de-escalate. The likelihood, and we saw this before, of both parties de-escalating the conflict is 1 in 4 chance, right? There's a 1 in 4 chance that it's actually going to get to this state of affairs, right? It's far more likely that we're going to have escalated conflict, that the conflict is in some sense going to be escalated in varying degrees, right? So there's only a 25% chance that we're going to arrive at a properly, fully de-escalated conflict, which is actually the best of all possible. But the most likely, the best acceptable for this sort of hypothetically constructed war that I've designed is where we use deterrence theory to sort of intimidate the enemy into standing down, right? So as you can see, I didn't talk about this yesterday because I didn't want to complicate it, but I'm making it a little bit more complicated now, adding another layer of depth to the war game analysis, is we recognize that we've attained an equilibrium here because this is actually the best possible result, right? This result would be punishment, right? This would be punishment where, which would result in, maximum casualties, maximum potential, rather, for casualties. This result would result in me being a sucker, where I stand down and they escalate, right? Now I'm on the defensive, right? We don't want that. So this is not acceptable, this is not acceptable, this is impractical for the particular situation. This ends up becoming the best possible result. In attaining this result, I've properly strategized my war plan, right? Now obviously there's going to be a different war plan for the opposition, but for my strategic planning in the battle, what I want to do is I want to use this deterrence theory as a means of attaining peace, right? I want to be able to escalate the conflict by increasing the level of threat, putting military presence in the vicinity, over the air, on the ground, what have you, in an attempt to force the opposition, the second party, to de-escalate the conflict, and thus that's the best possible solution, and that would bring about a state, one version of a state of equilibrium in this game, right? So it's important to recognize that the best of all possible outcomes and the best possible outcomes aren't the same. In this particular game that I've designed, the best possible outcome is reward. It's highly unlikely. There's only 25% chance that you will attain reward. There's a 75% chance that there's going to be some version of escalated conflict. The best version of escalated conflict in this particular war, for Party 1, is temptation, so that's the route that we should take. There are some provisions built into this assumption which I'll discuss later. Next point, on the role of commitment in game theory, right? So we recognize that there's a relationship. Remember, when you think commitment, just think the boy who cried wolf story, right? The boy was not committed to the fact that, or the illusion that there was a wolf coming, right? His actions in that game, if you want to call it that, were imperfect because he lost all credibility in continually lying. So that when the threat was actually present, his claiming that there was a threat was undermined by his historical account of having made imperfect actions at each decision node, right? His actions previously have been imperfect. Why do we think his actions at this point is going to be perfect? It's not going to be there to maximize his interest. He acts as he has in the past, but the consequences are tragic, right? Because now the wolf is actually present and no one believes him. So commitment then refers generally to the relationship between a state's posturing, roughly speaking, and the likelihood that the state will act in a predictable fashion. So when I say I'm going to do X, I do X. When I say I'm going to do X is my posturing, right? When I say I'm going to do X, if you do that, I'm going to slap you, right? You can imagine some really perverse, relationship, parent-child relationship, right? Where it's like, if you do that again, I'm going to slap you. And the kid does it, and dad, because dad's always the abuser, right? So dad, he slaps the kid. Whoa, kid's like, holy crap, that dude slapped me. Same, a couple months later, same situation. Dad goes, if you do that again, I'm going to slap you. Kid goes, does it. Whoosh, he does it. Kid knows now, no, when dad says, yo, if I do that again, I'm going to slap you, I need to stop doing that, right? Of course, there's a whole lot that goes in this. It's not always the case that the kid will stop doing the action, but the kid will definitely know that if he does the action, he's going to receive corporal punishment for his action, right? Therefore, the words, the posturing is taken as credible. Why? Because for whatever reason, that posturing maximizes the interest of the father. Let's say it's control over the kid, whatever, right? If his interest is dominating and controlling the child, then his actions, if his actions are perfect, right, to maximize that control of the child, when he says he's going to do it, he needs to do it, right? If he doesn't do it, then it undermines his authority. And actually, on a quick tangent, Zizek, actually, of course, right? Zizek has a really cool thing to say about the abusive dad and the role of power. I thought it was really, really interesting. I'm not going to involve it now. But he's like, it's precisely the father who has no power, who's always beating the child, that manifests his lack, his complete impotence of power in actually physical abuse. It's the father who actually has total control, where he just gives you that evil eye. He gives you the dad eye. And you're like, oh, he doesn't have to exert physical or corporal punishment on the child in order to get the child to conform. You can sort of do an analysis of those varying functions of power as well.